الحمد لله الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, as to what proceeds, after praising Allah the Most High, separated from His creation in a manner which befits His Majesty, with love and veneration exclusively for Him, and then requesting the Most High to send His salah and salam upon His final Prophet and Messenger, Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Qurashi. We meet for our weekly meeting to study the book by Shaykh al-Allama al-Ma'sumi rahimahullah ta'ala. The popular title of this book is "Should a Muslim Follow a Particular Madhhab?" Meaning that, is it obligatory that a Muslim must be a Hanafi, a Shafi'i, a Maliki, or a Hanbali? Because this discussion is always discussed amongst those who take the deen seriously. Or in other words, is taqleed, blind following, wajib? We started to read the biography or the seerah of the Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala. And last week I mentioned the names of some books that the Shaykh rahimahullah studied. On the request of a student of knowledge who corresponded with me afterwards, the student requested that I give a brief description of the books that were mentioned that the Shaykh studied rahimahullah ta'ala for the benefit of the brothers and sisters. So when we go to the biography of the Shaykh, the second paragraph, before we start going and reading the second paragraph, I mentioned that there is a mistake in the English edition. In the English edition, it says that the kunya of Shaykh Muhammad Sultan al-Khujandi was Abu Abdirrahman. This is khata. That which is correct is that he is Abu Abdul Karim. He is Abu Abdul Karim. This shows that if you rely upon the English editions or the translations, you will fall into these errors. Always go back to the original source to make that comparison. So the Shaykh's kunya is Abu Abdul Karim. His name is Muhammad Sultan ibn Abdullah, Muhammad Orun bin Muhammad Mir Sayyid ibn Abdurrahim ibn Abdullah ibn Abdul Latif ibn Muhammad Ma'soom al-Mashhur bil Ma'soom al-Khujandi. Ma'soom is an ascription to his great-grandfather, whose name was Muhammad Ma'soom. So you have people who sometimes the ascription is towards their grandparents, great-grandparents. So he's known as al-Ma'soomi because of his great-grandfather, whose name was Muhammad Ma'soom. We know that the Shaykh was from Azerbaijan and he spoke Turkish. So the second paragraph says, so correct that mistake, that he began his studies by reading the books and treatises written in the Turkish language, the language of the people of his land. Then he began to study the works in Arabic, such as those as al-Uzai. This is what he says. So this is the first book that was mentioned. And that which is correct is that the book's name is al-Izzi with a kasra, not al-Uzai as it is written here. Al-Izzi with a kasra. The book is called Tasrīfu al-Izzi with a ayn. This book is on the etymology of the Arabic language, sarf. So the Arabic language has two main subjects: Nahw, which is Arabic grammar. Sarf are the measurements of the verbs and the discipline which discusses the different verbs and their patterns. This is known as sarf, which is known as etymology. So this is the first book. It's called Al-Izzi, but the book is called Tasrīfu al-Izzi, which was written by a scholar by the name of Izzuddin Abu al-Ma'ali, who died in the year 655 after Al-Hijrah. Izzuddin Abu al-Ma'ali Abdul Wahhab Ibn Imaduddin Ibrāhīm al-Khazraji al-Zinjani al-Ma'ruf bil-Izzi. This is a must for a talib al-ilm who wants to master the Arabic language and its verbs. If you want to know the different patterns of the verbs and how they are used, and if the patterns change, how the meanings change, then you need to study this book. Tasrīfu al-Izzi. It's a classical text which everybody studies. So this was the first book which was mentioned. Then the second book which was mentioned is called Zinjani. So this is again one single book, Tasrīfu, because Izzuddin is known as al-Khazraji al-Zinjani. So they are not two separate books, they are actually one book by one person, Izzuddin. The next book that was mentioned is known as Awamil al-Jurjani. This book, when we were young boys, we had to memorize this book. Till this day, they teach this book in the Darul Ulums. It's a classical book, very beneficial to learn. It's called Al-Awamil al-Mi'atu al-Nahwiyya or Awamil al-Jurjani. This is a classical text which I hope to teach, inshallah, one day to the students who have some grasp of the Arabic language. A very beneficial book. written by Abu Bakr Abdul Qahir ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Muhammad al-Jurjani al-Shafi'i, who died in the year 471 and 474 after Hijrah. Till this day, this book is taught in all the Darul Ulums in the subcontinent. And many ulama have written explanations to this. It has 100 awamil of nahw that a talib al-ilm must know. Remember when we started studying the Arabic language, we used to memorize the different patterns. So we would say fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, fa'alta, fa'altuma, fa'altum, fa'alti, fa'altuma, fa'altunna, fa'altu, fa'alna. 14. This is how we would. Yafalu, yafalani, yafaluna, tafalu, afalu, nafalu. This is how they would make us memorize in the madrasas. Fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, fa'altuma, fa'altum, fa'alti, fa'altuma, fa'altunna, fa'altu, fa'alna. So, the Arabic language, as we can see that the Shaykh, then the next book that was mentioned here is Al-Kafiyah. Al-Kafiyah fi ilm al-Nahm. Again, this book is a very important book in ilm al-Nahm, written by Ibn al-Hajib. Ibn al-Hajib is Jamaluddin ibn Uthman ibn Umar ibn Abi Bakr al-Misri al-Isnawi al-Maliki, who died in the year 646 after Hijrah. So Al-Kafiyah is a very important book in Nahw. Then some of the books that were mentioned, which belong to the school of dialectical discussions on theology, ilm al-kalam, which the scholars say that the people of Sunnah must not study. They mentioned the book called Musallam al-Ulum. This is wrong. It's Sullam al-Ulum fil Mantiq. The correct name of the book is Sullam al-Ulum. Sullam al-Ulum fil Mantiq. So we have two subjects. You have falsafa, three. You have three things when it comes to philosophy and debating. You have Mantiq, you have falsafa, and you have ilm al-kalam. This is in Mantiq, which is translated as rhetoric. So this was written by Muhibbullah ibn Abdul Shakur al-Bihari al-Hindi, who died in the year 1119 after Hijrah. This book is a famous book known as Sullam al-Ulum fil Mantiq, which the Shaykh studied. Rahimullah. As we know that the Shaykh, before he became Salafi, he was among the way of the people of Kalam. Now, the next book is known as Hikmatul Ayn. Again, this book is in Ilm al-Kalam. And this was written by Najmuddin Abu al-Hasan Abu al-Ma'ali al-Katibi al-Qazwini, who died in the year 1294 after Hijrah. Again, another book on Kalam. Then we have the book by Isharat of Ibn Sina. The famous Ibn Sina, everybody knows the famous Ibn Sina. That which is correct with regards to this man is that this man was not a Muslim. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah made takfir of Ibn Sina and many of the other scholars. The Ibn Sina, due to his philosophical positions and what he believed and what he called to, had left the fold of Islam. So this book by Ibn Sina, again, Isharat, is on Ilm al-Kalam. Then he studied the books of Aqidah, the The first book that has been mentioned is Al-Aqa'id al-Nasafiyya. Al-Aqa'id al-Nasafiyya is the most core book of the Maturidis, written by Umar ibn Muhammad al-Nasafi, who died in the year 537 after Hijrah. Maturidi Madhhab. This is the book which is still taught in the Darul Ulooms of the Hanafis, which includes the Turks, which includes the subcontinent. The Deobandis and the Barelvis, they continue to study this book as one of the main books of Aqidah in the Darul Ulooms. It's a book which represents the Maturidi Aqidah. I studied this book in detail, and I have also written a refutation of it, which is in my library. The manuscript of it is in my library. Ta'liqat, some notes that are made. So I studied this book when I was before I became Salafi, and then I studied this book again with a big Salafi scholar who also wasn't a Salafi, and then we compiled all the notes in refuting the Aqidah when it goes against the Aqidah of the Sahaba and the Safiyya. Then you have the book called Al-Aqa'id al-Adudiyya. Al-Adudiyya. This is again another book in the Ashari Maturidi Aqidah, written by Aduddin al-Iji, Abdul Rahman ibn Ahmad ibn Abdul Ghaffar, who died in the year between 753 to 765 al-Hijr. Again, this is another text of the Al-Ashari wa Maturidi Aqidah. Then we have Matn al-Jawhara fi ilm al-Tawheed. Everybody knows al-Tahawiyya. I don't think I have to mention to the students what is Aqidah al-Tahawiyya. Aqidah al-Tahawiyya is known. Jawhar al-Tawheed was written by Burhanuddin al-Maliki, Ibrāhīm ibn Hasan al-Laqani, who died in the year 1041 after Hijrah. Then we have the famous book known as Al-Aqīdah al-Sanusiyya. They say the Sanusi Aqidah. Again, the Ashari Maturidi, representing the Ashari Maturidi Aqidah. Written by Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Yusuf ibn Umar ibn Shu'aib al-Sanusi al-Tilmasani al-Hasani, who died in the year 895 after Hijrah. So these were some of the books that were mentioned last week. And one student of knowledge wanted to know, Jazahullahu khair, he just didn't want to read them and not know anything about them. So this is just giving you the title of the book, the background of the book, which Aqidah it represents, and the year it was written. You will notice a pattern of all these books. None of them go back to the time of the Salaf. None of them go back to the first 3 generations. They all go back after the first 3 generations. Some are even later than that. Some are just the closest that they have is al-Tahawiyya. Al-Tahawiyya. But apart from that, everything is written afterwards. So this was with regards to the title of the books. Then somebody asked me, the same student who contacted me, he asked me the same question. I mentioned last week that there was 4 maqamat in the Al-Haram al-Makki, in Masjid al-Haram. So when the people would go for Umrah, if you were Hanafi, you would pray behind the Hanafi Imam. If you were Maliki, you would pray behind the Maliki Imam. If you are Shafi'i, you would pray behind the Shafi'i Imam. If you are Hanbali, you would pray behind the Hanbali Imam. So there was 4 different places, allocated places where there was 4 Imams. So we ask you the question, that when were these 4 maqamat placed in the Haram? Which year did this happen? So when you go back into history, you find that the historians, when we look into the books of history, the mu'arrikhun, they say there was also another 5th maqam. So you had the famous 4 schools of fiqh of the Sunnis. Then there was a 5th maqam for the Zaydis. The Zaydi Shias come from Yemen. And that was removed in the year 726 after Hijrah. The Zaydi. So then there was only 4 left. So the scholars, the historians, they talk about what would happen is that if you went for Umrah and you are a Hanafi, you would pray only behind the Hanafi. But the problem always happened is when everybody would pray Maghrib. Because Maghrib time, there's a single time for Maghrib. The time of praying Maghrib Salah is fixed by everybody. So what would happen is that the Hanafi Imam, the Hanafi would be praying behind the Hanafi, and the Shafi Imam would say Allahu Akbar and he would go into ruku. And the Maliki Imam would say Sami Allahu liman hamida and he would get up. So if you saw the state of the people during Maghrib Salah, it would be chaos. This Imam is reading aloud over this Imam, and people are confused. They don't know what to do. They don't know who to follow. You can imagine. So that which seems to be apparent, wallahu a'lam, that these 4 maqamat or 4 musallah, the 4 musallas were placed in al-Masjid al-Haram between 442 after Hijrah and 497 after Hijrah. And when one of the historians, Nasir Khusro, when he made Hajj in 442, he didn't mention that there were these 4 places. You know, when a historian or when a Rahal visits, he always writes about the most astonishing things. So this particular historian, I think in 442, as they say, he was between 442 and 497. He did not mention that there were 4 maqamat in the Haram. But Al-Fasi in Shifa al-Ghiram, he mentioned the maqamat in 497 after Hijrah when he went there. He said, and in the Masjid al-Haram, there is a place for the Hanafis, place for the Malikis, the place of the Shafis, and there's a place for the Hanbalis. And this continued for centuries until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed Malik Abdul Aziz rahimahullah, when Allah granted him sulta, power and authority of Hijaz, when he became the ruler of Al-Hijaz, of Makkah and Medina in 1344. As the first thing when he entered Makkah, he said that these 4 maqamat to be destroyed and the Muslim Ummah to return back to pray behind one Imam in Al-Masjid al-Haram. Jazakallahu khairah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him Jannah for uniting the Muslim Ummah once again behind one single Imam. And this was done in the year 1344 after Hijrah. When he came, he said, what is this? Hanafi, Shafis, Malikis, Hanbalis. He said, Dusturuna, Kitabullah, wa Sunnati Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said, destroy them. And that was a brave move, because the fanatics, Makkah and Medina, was full of these fanatics. But the haiba of King Abdul Aziz rahimahullah ta'ala, and his bravery, he did not care. He said, remove them. Let's see who comes and stands and opposes us. Commanded his people, and they demolished the 4 maqamat that were present in Hijaz. Alhamdulillah, once again, Al-Haram al-Makki, or Masjid al-Haram, the Muslim Ummah, which is the Qibla of the Muslimin, they became united under one Imam. And since that day till this day, we find, alhamdulillah, that even the Shias, they pretend to pray behind one single Imam. Although they are liars, I've seen many of them. I've seen the Rafidah, that they would come late in the last rak'ah, and they would stand next to you. And when the Imam would give salam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, masbuq, you have to make up the rakat. The Shia would tap on his lap and give the salam. Salah of the munafiqeen, no doubt. But even they have now been compelled to pray behind one Imam. Alhamdulillah for this mercy. Now, so these were the questions that were asked. We'll go back to the biography, which we hope to finish today, and then we'll start the question from Japan. Now, wa alaikum assalam. So, Zainab, you read? No, تفضل.
بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Al-Ma'sumi then returned home and joined his family. When he settled, he began teaching in the school founded by his father and became engrossed in the works of Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, and Ibn Abdul Barr, and the truth became clear to him. He was made a mufti of Sharia courts in 1328 after Hijrah.
Barakallahu fiqh. So, after we know that Ma'sumi, he traveled to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and then he went to Egypt, and he went to Jamiat al-Azhar, and he met many people of knowledge. After that, he returned home. Remember, he had fled from his hometown due to the fanatics of the Madhhab there. So he returned back home and he started to teach in the madrasa which was founded by his father. But it was at this point of Ma'sumi's life that he started to study the books of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Abdul Barr. We know that Al-Imam Ibn Abdul Barr is known as the Bukhari of the West, Spaniard from Spain, Andalus, and they call him the Bukhari of the West. And the truth became clear to him, meaning that his journey of coming closer to the truth, coming closer to the truth, coming closer to the truth, analyzing, seeing the discrepancies, seeing the contradictions, Then he was at his last and final point. And then he came to the books of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then opened his heart and guided him to ad-da'wah as-salafiyya. A questioner may ask this question, just to make this point clear. What is so special about the books of Ibn Taymiyyah? Why do our ulama emphasize that you should read the works of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and his student Shaykh al-Islam Ibn al-Qayyim? This question is asked quite a lot. Some people, they think that we are blind followers of Ibn Taymiyyah. They call us the Taymiyyites or the Taymiyyun. And as we know that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah was a scholar from the 8th century of al-Hijrah. The answer to this is that if you want to know the khulasa of the madhhab of the Salaf, then Ibn Taymiyyah will give it to you. So if you don't have the himmah, the strength and the courage to read the mutawwalat and read the books which are of volumes and in detail of the Salaf, and Ibn Taymiyyah has read all of them for you and has given you the conclusion, summarized them for you, and has basically given you something on the plate. This is the benefit of reading the books of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim. That Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah, they give you the summarized or the concise conclusion of the way of the Salaf. And this is what happens when you read the books of Ibn Taymiyyah. Now, so he was appointed as a mufti in the Sharia courts in 328 after Hijrah. Now,
This stage in the life of al-Ma'sumi was a time of research and seeking the proof for every matter. He would compare books and weigh them according to the Quran and Sunnah. Gradually, the correctness of the Salafi methodology became clear to him, so he clung to it and began to write in refutation of taqleed. Consequently, the deen was revived in the lands beyond the Tigris, and Salafi thought spread. The shrines, tombs and centers of pilgrimage which were worshipped besides Allah were demolished.
now, barakallahu fiqh. So when al-Ma'sumi started to read the books of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and Shaykh al-Islam Ibn al-Qayyim, one of the benefits of reading the books of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim is that your brain, you start using your brain. The brain starts to function. Your IQ will naturally go up if you start reading the books of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim. That's guaranteed bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, because of the knowledge that it contains. And when you have a particular favorite author, you read a book and you like the style of writing of a particular author, so you always buy his books because you like the way he addresses the issues, the way he approaches, his approach, his arguments, his counter arguments, his style of refutation. All this has an impact upon you when you read. The impact of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah is research, تحقيق, البحث والتحقيق. Ibn Taymiyyah will make your brain function that you start researching and start seeking the truth. And Ibn Taymiyyah's works will have the impact that you will not accept anything from anybody without proof or evidence. That's why you will never find, I challenge you to bring me in the Majmu' al-Fatawa of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, or bring me a book of Ibn Taymiyyah where Ibn Taymiyyah makes a claim and does not bring proof or evidence for it. Never. Never. This was his methodology. And his methodology was what? His methodology was proof and evidence and then build. So first you search for the proof and the evidence, and then you take a stance. Whereas the people of Bid'ah, the heretics, they build, then they look for proof and evidence. So they will build that to celebrate the Prophet's birthday is permissible, then they will look for the evidence for it. Whereas al-Sunnah, they look for evidence and they research and then they build. And this is what he did. So everything he read, when he started to analyze and scrutinize, so all the knowledge that he had gained for so many years, he put it in the scales of the Kitab and the Sunnah. Started comparing. Everywhere where he found that this was against the Kitab and the Sunnah, he started refining. He started refining it. Till it became clear to him that the methodology and the manhaj of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah was in reality the manhaj of the Sahaba, Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in, and the Salaf al-Salih. And then he realized that if you are a person who seeks proof and evidence, if you are a person who researches and does not blindly follow, then you have to be somebody who is against taqleed, and you have to refute it. Your da'wah cannot move without refuting taqleed. Because the opposite of fire is what? Wood. The opposite of black is what? White. So the opposite of at-tahqiq is what? At-taqleed. Research. The opposite of research is blind following. So a person who was a fanatic, a person who was a muqallid, and you will see this, when he leaves the fanatism, the ta'assub, when he leaves taqleed, when he frees himself from the imprisonment of at-taqleed, he becomes the biggest opposer of it. Becomes the biggest opposer or the greatest opposer of it. And this is what Ma'sumi did. And Ma'sumi started to call the people to the Sunnah. And they mentioned here the word Salafi thought. I don't think that this is a correct word to use. Salafiyah. I see a lot of brothers and sisters, they say Salafism. What did they say? This is batil. Salaf. There is no such thing as Salafism. As-Salafiyah is a manhaj, a methodology which has come to us through divine revelation. Nor is it a thought. A thought is a thought of a man or a thinker. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not present his thoughts to us. As Allah says, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيُ يُوحَىٰ. Prophet doesn't speak from his desires. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam only speaks with divine revelation. So this term Salafi thought is incorrect and not appropriate. Rather, we say that the Salafi manhaj or the Salafi da'wah or the Salafi madhhab or the Salafi maslak spread. Thoughts. You have thoughts, I have thoughts. Our thoughts can be right or wrong. Something which is divine is not based upon a thought. However, it's divine. So the Salafi da'wah spread. The shrines, the tombs, and the centers of pilgrimage which were worshipped besides Allah were demolished. Now,
after the Bolsheviks came to power in Russia in 1917, many scholars were killed and many thousands were transported to north, where most of them died. Some, by the grace of Allah, were saved. As for al-Ma'sumi, he was arrested several times and finally ordered to be shot. By the grace of Allah, he was able to escape, and in 1928 fled to China, where he remained for a number of years. Then he left for Mecca, and in 1354 after Hijrah, he settled there and became a teacher in Dar al-Hadith in Mecca.
Now, so our Caucasian brothers, our Caucasian brothers here, they will probably know about what has been mentioned here, Muhammad, with regards to what happened in the 1970s. The brothers corrected me, I call them Russians, but they said they are Caucasian. So many scholars at that time were killed due to the communist ideology and the compulsion of denouncing your deen. And many scholars were transported, killed, and tortured. As for al-Ma'sumi al-Khujandi, then he was arrested several times, and then he was ordered to be shot, but Allah saved him. So in 1928, he fled to China. And then from China, he stayed there for a number of years. And then in 1354, he went back to Hijaz. And there he was appointed as a lecturer in Darul Hadith in Mecca, which still exists today. So the Darul Hadith in Mecca still exists on the side of Ajiyat, where the building is. Before it was in the Haram, but now it's moved there. Now,
in the months of Hajj, he would teach in Masjid al-Haram in the Turkish language, and Turkish pilgrims would attend these lessons. Through them, he would send letters to his family, news of whom had ceased to reach him towards the end of his life. He died in the year 1380 after Hijrah, rahimahullah, and may Allah grant him a home in paradise.
Ameen. So during the days of Hajj and in the months of Hajj, the Shaykh would teach in Turkish language. And the Hujjaj that would come, through them he would send letters to his family and ask about the whereabouts of his family. And the Shaykh rahimahullah then died in 1380 after Hijrah. Rahmatullahi alayhi rahmatan wasi'ah. Now,
Al-Ma'sumi wrote a large number of books, both in Arabic and Turkish. Hidayat Sultan ila Muslimi Bilad al-Yaban, Sultan's gift to the Muslims of Japan, was printed for the first time in the year 1368 after Hijrah in Egypt. In this year, 1949, Shaykh Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani visited Shaykh al-Ma'sumi in his house near Masjid al-Haram and received a copy of Hidayat al-Sultan in printed form as a gift from its author.
Barakallahu feek. So Ma'sumi, al-Ma'sumi al-Khujandi wrote many books. And this book which we are studying, should a Muslim follow a particular madhab, this is not the name of the book. The name of the book is Hadiyat al-Sultan ila Muslimi Bilad al-Yaban. This is the name of the book. And Shaykh Albani rahimahullah ta'ala in 1945 and in 49, when he visited Makkah, when he did Hajj, he met Shaykh al-Ma'sumi al-Khujandi, who gave him a personal copy of this book. So somebody asked me the question that why am I teaching this book? The question is that this book has been praised by who? By Shaykh Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani, and those who are with Shaykh Albani rahimahullah ta'ala, who are studying with Albani, who are living with Albani, they reprinted this book. And that's why we are studying this book. And by this, alhamdulillah, we have completed the biography of the Shaykh. So this shows the lofty status of this book. Shaykh Albani rahimahullah ta'ala, for Shaykh Albani rahimahullah ta'ala to accept that gift and to read it and to benefit from it shows that this book is a beneficial book. And alhamdulillah, this book was then edited and reprinted again. Now we move to the letter, a letter from Japan. Now,
a letter from Japan. I received the letter from Mr. Muhammad Abdul Hayy Qurban Ali on behalf of Muslims of Tokyo, Japan, asking some basic questions about Islam. What is Islam? After acceptance of Islam, is it necessary for a Muslim to follow any one of the four prevalent Imams and their sects? Is it required that a Muslim be Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki or Hanbali, along with being a Muslim, or is just being a Muslim is enough? The problem of faith and sects came up when a group of enlightened Japanese wished to accept Islam as their religion. They conveyed their intention of becoming Muslim to Jamiat al-Muslimin of Tokyo. Members of Jamiat from India advised them to become Muslim and follow Imam Abu Hanifa. According to them, the Madhhab of Abu Hanifa is the only way which guides the Muslims to lead a pious and God-fearing life. On the other hand, the members of Jamiat from Indonesia guided them to follow Imam al-Shafi'i because the Madhhab of Shafi'iyya will lead them to paradise. On hearing these different viewpoints, they were confused. This puzzling problem stood in their way of accepting Islam. Questions raised in their letter moved me, and I, seeking help from Allah, wrote the answer according to my knowledge.
Now, so this is what happened. There is some people in Japan, in Tokyo, they want to become a Muslim. They want to become Muslims. But before they become Muslims, the fanatics, they start arguing amongst themselves. So the Indians, or the Muslims from the Indian subcontinent, they always say that a person should become a Hanafi. Because why? Because the Hanafi madhab is the most widespread madhab in the world. And the reason they give for this is that they tell you that it's the most widespread madhab in the world, but they don't tell you how this madhab was spread. Madhabs historically was spread in two different ways. As if you look into history and look into the books of history, you will see this clearly. without any dispute. Either you were enforced or compelled to adopt that madhab, or the madhab was spread due to the teachings of that particular scholar, of when he died, his students continued to spread his madhab and people accepted it. And it is clearly known that the Hanafi madhab was not spread due to its teachings, due to it being a strong madhab which overpowered the other madhahib. It is for this reason that we see al-Shafi'i takes refuge in Misr, because he was compelled to give fatwa only according to the madhab of who? Of Abu Hanif, and he refused. And this is just going a few years after the death of Abu Hanif. Al-Shafi'i we're talking about here, to whom a madhab also is ascribed and attributed to, and many other scholars. So we find this, we find that the level of fanaticism, as it is mentioned in the books of Hanafi fiqh, that when Isa alayhi salam returns, he will be a blind follower of the Hanafi madhab. He will be a blind follower of the Hanafi madhab. So the Indians, the subcontinent Muslims, they said that these Japanese should become Hanafis. Then the Indonesians, they follow the Shafi'i madhab. They said no, they should be Shafi'i. And then they started quarreling, arguing, and these Japanese, when they saw this, they became confused. But if there is confusion before accepting Islam, then how much confusion will there be after we accept Islam? So some of them became reserved of whether they should become Muslims or not, and others sought clarification. We have this. Remember, I was with our Shaykh in Jami Salafiyah, Mufti Muhammad Rais Nadwi. He told me a very interesting story. He said that there was a businessman, and he said that this story was told to him. Wallahu a'lam bi sihhatihi. But he said it's been narrated. He said there was a businessman who decided that he wanted to become a Muslim. So he went into a masjid and he said, look, I've been reading about Islam, Christian, Nasrani, and I want to become a Muslim. Okay? So what's the procedure of becoming a Muslim? So they said to him that you take the Shahada, and then they immediately scared him that he has to get circumcised. Before even a person becomes Muslim, they scare the revert that he has to become circumcised. So that gives him he already has half a heart attack here. So they told him you have to get circumcised. So he took that much. He said, okay, no problem. Then they said that there was one or two guys coming. They said, okay, take. Then some other guys, they came and they started discussing amongst themselves. So he's there waiting, and these guys are like, so there was some Hanafis and Shafi'is. They were there. Now they're arguing that as soon as he becomes Muslim, which madhab is he going to follow? So he's there sitting there waiting to take the Shahada. And these guys are arguing, and then they started raising their voices. He became a bit scared. He said, what's going on? You know, what's wrong? What's happening? Why are you guys arguing? They said, no, you don't need to worry, you don't need to worry. So he sat down again. Then they started talking. Again, they were discussing. And again, they started arguing. Again, they started raising their voices. And then he got up. He said, now you've got to tell me. If it's about me, I need to know. He said, look, after you become a Muslim, you have to follow a madhhab. He said, now remember, this guy is somebody who's just been reading. He says, where does this say in the Quran? Any reference? Any reference in the Quran that madhhab I have to follow? He said, okay, what madhhab is this? They say you have to follow this madhhab. He said, who is this madhhab for? They said, the Indians, they said, Abu Hanifa. Then he said, then why are you guys arguing? They said, no, there is another madhhab. So he said, wow, there's another madhhab. I thought the Quran is one, Allah is one, Muhammad is the final messenger. So where did this madhhab come from? He said, no, you will understand, and it's too advanced for you. He said, then make me understand. I'm here. I'm not going nowhere until you make me understand what's going on here. I need to know. And then he asked this question. He asked the Hanafi, he said, so who chose your madhhab? You're choosing my madhhab. So who chose your madhhab? He said, no, I didn't choose madhhab. I was born as a Hanafi. He said, born as a Hanafi. How were you born as a Hanafi? He said, as soon as I was born, they chose the madhhab for me. So he said, how is that? So he said, where were you born? Shafi. I think must have been somebody from Indonesia or somewhere from that area where the Shafi madhhab is followed. And he said, oh, he was born there, so he follows that madhhab. This man is a businessman, he's a smart guy, always traveling. Then they explained to him there's 4 madhhabs. So they started to talk about the madhhab and he started listening. So he said to them, he said, so these madhhabs that you have to follow are spread around the world. Yes? India, Pakistan, you have to follow one madhhab. Indonesia, you have to follow. They told him it's different. He said, but I'm an international businessman. So if I'm in India, shall I follow the Hanafi madhhab for 2 months? When I'm in Africa, follow the Maliki madhhab for 2 months. When I'm in Indonesia, follow the Shafi madhhab for 2 months, because that's what makes sense, because I wasn't born. And they all looked at one another. He said, then I should be part-time for all madhabs. I want to follow every time, because I'm always traveling to India. He was an international business. So they all looked at each other. They had no answer. So he said, based upon your geographical location and where you are born, that's the madhab you follow. And he said, Rasul, did the Prophet Muhammad say that you have to follow any madhab? He said, no. So it confused this businessman. And he said, he came with a theory. He said, listen, you don't need to argue. Let me tell you, let me be 2 months each madhab. That'll be the best. I'll try all the madhabs, then I'll see which one suits me the best. So this is the hal of the people, that before they accept Islam, and this is something which we have even today, the reverts who become Muslims, they face this problem, yes? When you became Muslim, did they confuse you? No? It was
only Salafiyah.
Alhamdulillah. Came straight to the truth. But there's people who have been on journeys, reverts, where people have had a long journey before they actually come to following the Kitab and the Sunnah. Now, طيب. We'll stop here, and inshallah, the next lesson we will talk about Haqiqatul Islam wal Iman. Now. So the next one will be بيان حقيقة الإيمان والإسلام. وجزاكم الله خيرا. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.